Hi guys, this is Katipo for SNG.com. I'm playing Cheeseburglar at the $40 Hyper Turbo games on Merge. He's a heads-up cache specialist, but also very experienced in heads-up sit-and-goes in general, just not in Super Turbos, so he should be an interesting opponent to play, because he's thinking, just not experienced. I check back the bottom pair, and the reason for that is there are plenty of draws that could check raise me, and if I don't fold the flop, I'm often put in a lot of tough spots on the turn, where the draws will continue to barrel me, and I'll have still fairly good equity, but in a situation where their range is just too strong for me to call. So I feel like checking back is actually a much better option a lot of times versus a regular, because they're not calling you with worse that much often. And even when they do have worse, you're often forced to fold the best hand. We didn't get much value there, but I bet bigger because I figured on that kind of board he would be able to just call down, thinking that I'm with many draws and other weak hands. So I c-bet 336 as well, and it's not a c-bet that I expect to work a lot, but I'm planning on barreling. I didn't barrel the ace because I figured that that kind of card is just such a transparent barrel card that he might even give it less respect. Well, if I check, it looks more like I have showdown value, and I think that that's exactly what he actually thought here, though I didn't expect him to try to bluff into it if he thought that way. He actually has king 5 here, and he's turning it into a bluff. So he probably calls the flop with the intention of just checking down, expecting to be good. And on the ace, when I don't barrel it, he decides, okay, well, this guy might have fours or maybe some better king high, etc. So he makes a bluff there, but I think my hand is just too strong to fold. At the same time, it's not a spot where I expect to see that many bluffs, and the reason is he just called the flop. He just checked through on the turn. So if he were floating, I'd have expected him to show up with a bet a lot sooner, and when he does that on the river, I also don't expect him to be turning king highs into a bluff or something like pocket fours that he decided not to 3-bet shove, etc. So I am really surprised that he even bet there, because I don't think that I'm folding that many hands if he doesn't already have me beat. Would I fold a 6? Yeah, I guess I could fold a 6 if I thought he was super nitty, but this early in the match, especially without reads and trying to develop reads, I don't think that it would have happened. So I don't really love his bet, but I thought it was interesting just because it's a spot that I wouldn't have expected to see that hand. He didn't c-bet the flop, and I was immediately suspicious. The reason is that a lot of heads-up cash guys love to check back bottom pairs and ace highs and so on, and that's not necessarily bad, but I'm just saying that that's a different style than most Super Turbo regs. So I don't expect to just see a lot of air there. Actually, on that kind of board, which is pretty good for c-betting, I think it's extremely unlikely for him to have air, and if I barrel, yeah, it's a pretty questionable barrel with the reads that I have, because if he does have a 7, I don't think he's folding that easily. I min-raise call fairly wide here with ace 3 off at about 25 big blinds, but I figured he would be very capable of doing this. I already told him about how Super Turbos are more of a pre-flop game than he would be playing in heads-up cash and so on, so I'm sure he's in the 3-betting dynamic where I can call ace 3 off, at least with reasonable expectation. I don't know for sure yet because we haven't played much, but still, ace 3 off versus a reg is not actually that bad of a call. Most regs are 3-bet shoving, enough suited connectors and other hands like that that you're ahead of. In any case, if we turn to his 3-betting, you can see that right now it's at about, actually it's pretty small here, but it looks like it's about 30%, and that just highlights my read, but the sample size is pretty small. So he decides to 3-bet this 3-deuce-7 flop, which is a bit surprising. I guess with a 7 I'm not too surprised because it's a vulnerable hand, and he probably knows I'll have overs there a ton. But still, at the same time, I would be barreling if he did just call, so a bit surprised, but I'm not putting him on a bluff just yet. And I decide to barrel this jack turn with my gut shot, and the reason is that his fold to c-bet is extremely low for now, just 0%. So it seems like he'd be floating a good amount. And besides that, I think some of the bottom pairs at least would be folding when I bet there. And the jack is an especially good card because it's one of those that he just cannot really hit. He's not going to be floating just random jack high, and the jacks that would be floated would be stuff like gut shots, but I have one of the cards for a gut shot, so again that makes it less likely just combinatorically. And hands like king jack or ace jack are probably re-raising. So the jack is a card that I can hit because I'm c-betting a lot of air, and one that he can't really hit. So it actually is a scary overcard, as opposed to an ace, which I think is even less scary there. And the reason would be simple, that he's in a situation where he can't have that many aces because he's probably 3-bet shoving a good amount. So I should know that his range is weak, which should make him more inclined to call sometimes. And at the same time, I might be checking back some of the aces. So that would also weaken my range, and I might be checking back some turns even when I hit, because I know that that he won't have that card very often, and I want to give him an opportunity to call on the river when he improves, or to bluff, and just in general I don't expect to get that many streets of value. So anyway, there are a lot of reasons why I think a jack is actually a better card there than an ace in terms of bluffing somebody out, and just in terms of your range. Okay, so the HUD is a big focus of this video. I'm trying to really understand how the CoffeeHUD works. I think it's an excellent product, and one that is much more powerful than anyone could have even imagined when it was released, because some of these reads you can get from the different stack depths are just incredibly powerful. Some players are very different at different stack depths and will have extremely exploitable ways of playing that a normal HUD won't be able to detect. But this sort of HUD, it can pinpoint even the slightest inaccuracies, as long as you know how to use it correctly, and if you have a good sample. It's especially useful in hyper turbos, I would say. In regular speeds and turbos, you'll have fewer of those spots where you get enough of a sample to really understand how to exploit the differences at different stack depths. But in super turbos, you're going to have plenty of games and a lot of large samples versus some regs. So very, very interesting and useful. This extremely small c-bet is mainly designed to just take down to pot, not really to get value, even though I have ace high. I think it plays much better if I bet. And the reason is that I get to fold out their equity share. And besides that, I can potentially have a flush that I'm slow playing or some other hand like that. He doesn't know that yet. He doesn't know that I did that with just some random, very weak showdown value. And it can actually still get some value from flush draws that decide not to check raise and so on. If I just check, he'll probably be barreling some turns and rivers, and it's not going to be an easy spot. Until he figures out the range I did that with, it doesn't really matter that it's something I probably wouldn't do very often with a flush or top pair, etc. I can always adjust. As the sample size becomes bigger, it seems that his 3-betting isn't actually that out of line. So that's interesting to note, and I'm going to keep looking at that. I'm 3-betting 10-6 off because I've seen him open fairly wide at these deeper stack depths. As you can see, the HUD will show you that he's opening just 75%, but at the 17 plus big blind level, he's opening very wide, 100% so far. While lower than that, he's starting to really tighten it up. After c-betting the flop, I would have liked to barrel some cards, but I would prefer something like a 9, some card that will give me more equity. Especially in this sort of board, you have so many draws of pretty much every sort imaginable, and he can call me down with essentially any pair, and he'll also hit a king or a queen a decent amount, because those won't just shove over me, so he can have quite a bit of those. And they're not vulnerable enough that I'd expect him to just shove the flop on me either. So he flopped a straight there. That's interesting. And played it a little bit trappy. On this board, 4s is just an easy fold. I'll have plenty of better hands, and I'm not beating much. As we can see, he's folding to 3 bets over 60% of the time, so 2.5x should be immediately profitable, especially if the c-bets go through at all. And I like to see myself just 3-bet bluffing a bit more. Here I tried to trap on the turn by just continuing to check. I could have donked into him, because if he has a hand, he's probably still calling. I guess it's not a huge trap, but yeah, I don't think he's necessarily betting a 10 or a jack, so that's why I don't hate donking. A king he could have, but still, I mean, that's just one hand that I'm afraid of. And on the river, I decided to just check and call. Even though I have a set, he's probably not going to be calling very light. And I didn't expect him to necessarily c-bet all the ace highs. So when he c-bets and checks a turn, I feel like he will have some hands like a 10 or a jack quite a bit and won't be betting. But at the same time, that he might have just some random, like, I don't know, 4-6 off, which could turn itself, well, it is kind of a bluff, but which will just bet the river into me, but obviously won't call. And I don't think a 10 or a jack would call. He just doesn't have enough of a read on me to expect me to just necessarily bluff that high of a percentage there. And if he were to shove on me on the river, of course I would be folding, snap folding the set. It's going kind of fast, but I can't pause this, so I guess it's like Crank, where you just can't stop. Yeah, it's a little bit strange. If I click pause, nothing happens in Camtasia, so sorry about not pausing in some spots where it would be a little bit easier to understand if I paused. That was screen concealer. I just had it configured to show Nash. So easy 3-bet shove here with 3s. There's basically no range where I won't 3-bet shove. Quads are nice. So continuing to look at the HUD, we see that his 3-betting is actually fairly nitty. And below 18 big blinds, it's basically entirely 3-bet shoves, which makes our life easier because it means that he's a bit handcuffed and bluffing. He'll have to have hands that play somewhat reasonably in all-in pots. If he doesn't, he'll just get crushed. So I'm pretty sure he's not just, 3-bet shoving 4-9 off or something like that. And if he's doing that, I'm curious what kind of hands he has. Does he have more suited connectors? Like, let's say 8-7 suited, would he 3-bet shove, or would he be calling, and so on? That would definitely apply to his post-flop ranges, and then that could make it a lot easier on some boards if I know that he's just not hitting them very often. With what I'm getting from him now, I think that his 3-betting range is tight enough that I'd probably even be folding something like Queen 7 suited to a 2.5x. And I like this. I like it when I know what to do. If he has a 3-bet range of, like, let's say, I don't know, like 25% or so, it's just at the point where I can't be folding very many hands without a pretty good idea that I'll be bluffed off sometimes. And at the same time, I can't really just, monkey 4-bet shove on him because his range is still too strong for that. So it puts me in a bit of a tough spot. But when they don't 3-bet enough at all, and it's pretty obvious, you know that their range is too strong for you to do much about it. And that you can exploit in other ways by, for instance, raising wider because you know you won't be blown off your equity very much. And just having easier spots that way. So yeah, he's, to me, a little bit too tight for Super Turbos in 3-betting. but his fold to c-bet is still very low. He's folding a lot of turns instead, so one way to exploit that would be to either continue to bet half pot and then bet smaller on turns, or even bet bigger than half pot on the flop and then just, if assuming he doesn't adjust too much, and then just bet again smaller on turns, maybe half pot or less. Because this isn't heads up cash, and floating is actually fairly expensive. In super turbos, you can't really, if you float, also do a bunch of crazy like 3-bets post flop and so on. So yeah, it feels like he's being a bit too floaty, and I'll try to be barreling him more in spots that I think are appropriate and I have equity. He's also not raising a ton of c-bets, which makes sense if a lot of the hands that he's floating are, gut shot and overcard type hands that other people might just check raise. So it's just a different style as far as that goes. I was close to c-betting this flop, but I thought it would be interesting to just check back, get some reads, see if he would be just leading a lot of hands when I do that or not. And I can definitely call, so I'm not worried about getting bluffed off. I don't think I would get that much value anyway from multiple streets of betting, so if you're not getting 3 streets, it's okay to check the flop. Especially a flop like that where it's not very coordinated, so they're not likely to have draws that you could have gotten much value from. Another interesting thing is he's only c-betting 50%, and he's also not barreling the turn. So that's a bit surprising, because first of all, his c-bet range is much tighter than I would expect normally. So this is a function of sample size as well, but it's something to think about. And if you have a tighter c-bet range, I'd expect him to have a range that can be barreling me off of hands and also just for value a lot of the time. That would be the only advantage I can see to not c-betting, a reasonable, at least 60%. So that's interesting. It's just a very surprising thing, because even in heads of cash, people c-bet a lot more than that. So he might have a sort of trappy style. Maybe he's not actually c-betting some of his better hands too. I don't know yet. But it's just strange. It's just very strange to me. For a reg to do this is pretty uncommon. But one of the ways to adjust that is, well, one of the good ways I like is to just be a little bit looser in the big blind, because you're getting to see 4 cards a lot more often than usual, and even 5 cards, because it seemed like he wasn't barreling that much even when he did c-bet, so he can often just call like one gut shot and overcard and then not have to worry about ever getting bluffed off it. But I don't think he's that transparent, so we'll see. It's just that you can definitely call wider pre-flop if you're not getting barreled, if you're not facing that many c-bets. It's just a pretty easy spot. So here I do get 3x check raised in. I feel like there could be some buffs in here. There could also be a lot of value. Either way, my hand should have plenty of equity, definitely against something like, King 5. And even against Deuce 4, it's not doing too terribly. But it's interesting that he called this. So his VPIP in the big blind is about 60%. I don't think Deuce 4 suited necessarily falls under 60%. So he might be more inclined to call suited hands than just in terms of raw equity perspective. And he didn't 3-bet it too, which is another thing, because a lot of the regs will just decide, okay, that's a bit too weak to call, it misses too many flops, but I can probably 3-bet it profitably versus somebody that's opening quite wide, and I'm opening very wide versus him. So I would prefer that he 3-bet that hand instead, get the fold equity from the 3-bet, and also the c-bet. Probably it's going to play better than trying to just play it out of position with no initiative. So here he c-bet and then he checked the turn. Now it's a really strange spot because I don't think he would be bluffing on a 10, it's not really that kind of a great card, and a lot of the draws missed. It should be obvious to me, and I should be inclined to call with a weaker hand because of that. But at the same time, he's also betting more than half pot, which is inconsistent, because if I had something like King Jack or whatever, he shouldn't really expect me to fold the pair too much. So if I had something like King Jack or Jack 9 and he has just total air, I don't think he would need to bet that large. He should expect that hand to fold for a much smaller bet. So a bit inconsistent of just trying to get me off some busted draw that has him high carded. And that's why I feel very suspicious here, but I want to get reads, so I think I'm just going to call. And he does show the Queen Jack, which is a hand that I think he should be barreling to turn basically 100%. There's not much of a reason not to. I'm not actually floating him that wide. I don't think he should have that impression. So you shouldn't expect me to just lead into him on the river very often with just complete air. And at the same time, he's at the top of his range on the turn. If he's not betting that, then what is he actually betting on the turn? It's probably a very exploitable range. Of course, he probably will adjust. Maybe now that he saw that I saw that, he'll start betting more of those hands. But if he does continue that as a game plan, it just means that his turn betting range is very handicapped and just probably very easy for me to play against, because it's very likely to be a ton of air, while his river range, after he had checked the turn, includes only showdown value and strong hands. So I'm sure he won't be that transparent, but that's just something to consider, because that's a very exploitable play where he's hoping that I'm just going to be bluffing all my draws on the river and that I'll have plenty of air, and air that will not call the turn or check raise the turn, etc. Alright, so what we got from him was, from this HUD, we can see that he's folding a lot to 3-bets in the 17 plus big blind range. He's opening wide, 17 big blinds plus, even at 12 to 18 big blinds, somewhat wide. But, of course, below that he's opening much, much less. His VPIP in the big blind is somewhat high and not really changed at 12 to 18 big blinds, so that's a bit strange. You want to exploit that for sure. And his 3-betting range is extremely tight, so again, exploit that by, first of all, understanding that he can have some hands in his flatting range that you don't normally expect, probably some ace-x even, and some like king jacks, king queens, that a lot of players like to 3-bet. But you can also realize your equity of hands that actually will always have like 40% versus some hands, like king jack and so on. But normally we'll have to fold to 3-bet. So you can still be raising quite wide, and you don't have to worry about that. The positional advantage is still important enough to offset any of that. And we can play pretty easily versus 3-bets, knowing that his range is a little bit too strong for us to do much against. His c-betting is very conservative, which allows us to play more loosely in the big blind, and also to have easier decisions versus c-bets, where we don't have to be going crazy check raising him or anything like that. If we don't have a hand at all, it's probably best to just fold a lot until he shows us that he's widening his c-bet range. And then on the turn, he's seemingly checking back some very, very strong hands. So we have to look at his turn betting range and put that in perspective with the rest of his ranges. It looks like it would be maybe much more air heavy than you'd expect, but so far he just seemed not to be barreling the turn. So it could be that he just decides like pretty much never to barrel the turn, and that's one way of making it so that's not very exploitable, but it would mean that his playing position is extremely restricted because he can't be barreling us off hands very much. And if he can't do that, then he's just playing a game where it's more about the cards than about the positional advantage. So he really shouldn't want to do that, and I'm guessing he will be barreling some air. So I'm suspicious about his bets on the turn after seeing that he's not betting Queen Jack there. But that also makes me more inclined to give him credit for trapping me in certain spots, and especially after he chucks the turn, where it looks like he might have some good showdown value and so on, because a lot of the draws do barrel. I will give him credit on the rivers more than versus other players. He's not raising my c-bets very much also, but not a non-zero percentage, so obviously he may have some air there, but he's been barreling quite a bit after doing that. This HUD shows you that detail too, which is very important, because if you just see that, oh, he check raises a lot, but you don't know how to react when they barrel, then you can be in just awful spots. Some guys will check raise and then barrel basically all the time, turn and river, or just turn, and others will just check raise and shut down almost all the time if they get called. So you want to understand what kind of player type you're facing. So he's folding to c-bets 38% more than at first, for sure, but probably still floating quite a bit of hands, and capable of turning hands like King 5, which is King high showdown value on 336, what was it, Ace 10, into a bluff. So definitely capable player, but maybe even turning some hands into a bluff that aren't necessary to turn into a bluff, and will probably just be called by worse rather than folding out better. On the turn, again, he's folding some. I'd have expected this number to be even bigger if he was floating a lot. So he may be double floating at times. We don't really know that too much. His min-raising ranges are interesting and seem to be fairly high and normal for a reg. Maybe a little bit tighter at 12 to 18 big blinds as would be expected, but not too much. And lower than that, of course, it's very different, and you can't really rely on the previous stats for it, but it seemed like he was much tighter. So is there anything else this HUD is telling us that we can use for this? It's hard to even see it right now because obviously the video ended and I can't go back the way Camtasia works. And if I were to record it separately after I already produced the video, the quality would be much worse. But I think this gives you a good idea of how to use the HUD, and especially the separation by stack depths can be extremely useful. Like, I've seen some regs that are actually very good winning players that have incredibly exploitable ranges in that, and you don't normally notice those. Like, let's say they only min raise at 12 to 18 big blinds like 20%, and then open shove like 30% or so on. And you know then that his min raising range is almost certainly going to be stronger, while others are just a very different player, like limping maybe a ton and just not min raising very many strong hands. They just limp trap instead. And you can tell that again because this HUD has a special stat called limp trap, where it's up until 13 big blinds, and they'll show you if they call something that would normally be able to min raise, call, or shove, stuff like queens or jacks or ace 10, etc. So again, even those things which you'd expect to be very stylistic and something that you'd only get from notes can be completely unraveled just through this HUD. And we've basically only scratched the surface for this HUD because this player did not limp. So that area of his game is non-existent, and this HUD has plenty of stats for those too. And he also didn't do a lot of other things that the HUD covers. Of course, in a larger sample we'd see that, but it's extremely powerful, and I think it's very interesting to be able to use technology like this because, well, you'll never be able to have this sort of precision in a normal poker game, heads up, a casino, or anywhere else really. But this allows you to, even though I guess some purists would argue that, it's a crutch and so on, this allows you to actually use your thought process to the maximum, because we're not calculators as human beings. We're able to implement strategies and execute them well, but we can't really decide, how many times did he min raise and how many times did he fold and so on. So we don't know all that, and it's hard to pay attention to accurately. While this HUD will give you that information and many more in detailed spots that come up quite often but are usually hidden in other HUDs. And then you can actually use your thought process to know exactly what to do there, because now you have more information to be able to use it. So anyway, I think it's a very interesting HUD, and I'd recommend you guys get it. CoffeeHUD did a pretty good job on it, and he's continuing to update it. There's supposed to be an update in October too. Hope you enjoyed the video, and have fun and good luck in your games. Thanks a lot.